I was wondering, can me and you, can we be friends?
これ書いてくれませんか？こんなの意味ない。
There isn't anybody here who has even the slightest interest in trying to be your friend. Please, don't ever come back here again.
When I was in elementary school, I had a very simple process for social interaction. The first obvious chance I had at speaking with a classmate, like being sat next to them in assembly, I would just outright ask, "Do you want to be friends?" When they normally said sure, that would be my one friend for the year, pretty much the only person I would talk to until the classes shifted in the following grade. Working from feeling as a child does, I never thought about needing more friends or that I should go about making them differently. I just did what seemed right and, well, it worked. Whether we played Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Bakugan later on, sat next to each other or far away, ever visited each other's houses or not, these friendships were solid enough, with some going into high school even once all the classes were funneled into the same building again. They never really had deep conversations though, and featured a lot of light bullying if we're being honest, but I didn't know better, and my next group of friends made from card games functioned a lot less harshly than that. The collective interest in cardboard turned into me and my closest friend in the world at that moment, while pretty much spilling our gets to each other in the dugout of the neighborhood baseball field right around midnight, and then burning what was left from my terrible relationship in the parking lot, of course. And yet, even as those memories make me smile from just how Midwest teen movie they are, I haven't spoken to him in years. Well, that friend didn't stay, some did to maintain the hobby, and burgeoning from my college experience, although not directly related, there was an even newer group anyway. Misfits who made their own fits, met at bonfires and parties, people who showed me all I could be simply by being themselves. And from the openness that allowed me, those two groups are now more like one and a half. Across all these social interactions, all the methods of meeting them and more, there are a lot of similar feelings, roles, commitment, and so on, but I don't know if I could find any more line between them all than simply time and place. I mean, what else ties me to a drug dealer 10 years ago and a daycare manager 10 minutes ago? For an overthinker like it turned out to be, this is often a problem. How is so much of my life's importance comprised of relationships I can't define? Is it needs, goals, similarities? What really is friendship? I don't know if I could tell you, which is why I'm not. Why tackle the impossible when the counterpart is right there? Exclude what we don't to better improve our focus. What isn't friendship? We might think that, put simply, friendship is someone you have a reason to be around, someone whose presence gives you an advantage, improves your life in a tangible way. However, I think that it's more likely the opposite, someone you have no reason to be around, to gain no advantage from, and at least in the sense that such an advantage or reason can't be generally understood. For example, if we think of profit or connections to advance oneself, those are things which can be pretty applied generally. Every person knows that there is someone out there who can further their goals from being held closely. A writer who just so happens to make friends with a publisher, or a distant family member who's all too friendly once the will is impending. This is a bond formed only based on role, for the fact that someone is a publisher or that they are wealthy, and this is what disqualifies it from being real friendship. Now, sure, those things could eventually lead to it, recognizing that there are things to enjoy about the individual beyond their advantage over time, but in not considering the real person in any meaningful way, well, it surely doesn't start there. It's only the appearance of friendship, not the genuine article. That part is probably abundantly clear, more or less a common sense statement. However, where things get messy is that this doesn't have to be so concrete, something we see in Shoya's youth in A Silent Voice. When we open on a montage of all these kids goofing off in a friendly group, the main reason they're together is for a specific kind of advantage that Shoya provides, giving them fairly dedicated attention and covering up for their negative feelings. We find this in later actions, specifically how he starts to bully Shoko, a deaf student who transfers in, because he's not doing this from malice or childish cruelty, he's doing this for his friends. One of a silent voice's greatest details is this, a pattern of Shoya first observing his friends being annoyed by Shoko or just generally made to feel worse from her presence, taking note of how they feel from it, and then deciding to act on that. It's honestly quite blunt in showing this, having cuts to him observing intently as Naoka takes issue with Shoko's treatment, a disadvantaged girl in her own right envious of this special treatment, a misguided feeling that the fault is on Shoko for somehow stealing the help. But Shoya takes this and puts two and two together. If Naoka feels bad from Shoko being helped, he should do the opposite to make Naoka feel better, a cost-benefit which directly leads to his terrible bullying, and the success of which solidifies his friendships as advantage gained. Now, does this mean nothing we see between him and the others is friendship? Of course not, but it does mean that they were primarily friends who were together because things were good, not friends who made things good from being together. So, once the school can no longer ignore the rampant bullying which is drawing Shoko's mother into things, the neglectful school and teacher need a solution and go for the quickest. Make bullying her more consequential than the emotional advantage it provides. The teacher yells and slams his fist at them, turning what was about to be a confession from Shoya into a trial instead, which then allows everyone else to blame him and get off scot-free. It feels like betrayal, but it's in line with how they've always behaved. Shoya is the one who helped them avoid uncomfortable things, so what's the difference in lying about the whole thing right now? Especially right now where admission comes with punishment from the school and at home. This is where they've needed him to be comfort more than ever. This then follows, unfortunately, easily into him being bullied instead, something the school can live with since, well, he feels too remorseful for his own bullying to really complain about it. And then, even further, he becomes the means for them to connect with others once they're too old for childish bullying, but just the right age for rumors, as they talk to their middle and high school classmates about how horrible Shoya was in the past, solidifying them as someone better, and him as a loner for his entire school time. The line which runs through all of Shoya's interactions with them, from friends to not, is that he provides them with some kind of advantage. I think this understanding of things also explains why he doesn't start to feel sympathy for or soften his feelings on Shoko while they're still at the same school and both being bullied now. While his former friends write all over his desk, Shoko stays after to try and clean it up without Shoya knowing, which becomes an issue when he walks in to see this. Of course, she's doing something nice for him, but he ends up attacking her because it makes no sense to him. Everyone has always been getting something out of the interactions, so what is she getting out of this one? There has to be something, and then even if there's not, that's annoying because it makes absolutely no sense. It goes against everything he's ever learned about friendship or kindness, so it's simply enraging to him, almost like it must be mockery or pity, because from what he's seen, it can't be something good. This all carries into Shoya's teenage years as he remains friendless, even feeling like a draw on his family, taking up their money and food and giving little in return. So he works an entire summer away, sells all of his things, and leaves the sum of it to his family before he himself tries to leave as well, the biggest advantage he feels he can give them. But before he does, he wants to make peace with one thing: Shoko. He's been learning sign language this whole time in order to apologize to her beforehand, one last debt to pay, and also with the excuse of returning her notebook, one he took all those years ago and couldn't give back once she transferred. He actually does do this, and the encounter goes better than expected after a rough start, highlighted in the question,
I was wondering, can we be friends? Is that an option?
Pondering this answer from her seemingly positive response, he's unable to go through with leaving as he imagined. However, even though things went well, he struggles to see her again, with 2 weeks passing between that one and the next time that they really do. And part of the reason why is the notebook, or rather, what the notebook was, some little extension of that advantage mindset he learned so long ago. Because that's what using it as an excuse really was. First and foremost, giving that back to her before anything else as an offering of gain, however minimal it may have been, and he himself even recognizes that with everything terrible written in this, it might not even be something she wants back. But it was something to get to the requirement, and now without it, there's not much he can do. As he thinks,
But I can't just show up there. Not after everything I've done.
So he does consider doing so without, and very well may have, but he never fully commits. And I believe he wouldn't have without one reason, one very silly reason appearing before him. Bread. A coupon for bread passes him by on the wind, and he desperately hops around chasing it, going to cash it in, and then going to see Shoko because now he can offer her bread to feed the fishes, standing in for the same thing as the notebook. He's so desperate in his chase, not because it's actually crucial to him that she's able to feed the fish, but because it's crucial to him that he has something to offer. After all, as he knows it, can they really be friends without that? Well, this may just seem like pointless conversation to get through before more important things, and well, in some situations I think that can actually be kind of good. Right here it is quite negative. Because that offering to get through is a part of the reason why it takes him so long, layers between he, her, and the actual point that weaken its ability to be expressed. Shoko's younger sister, Yuzuru, goes with her to the place Shoya attempts to meet her and blocks him at the door, sending away his flimsy excuse of bread to feed the fishes with. Maybe if he was being honest, saying everything he really felt about the situation, Yuzuru would have let him through, or at least softened to it instead of remaining like a brick wall in the way, with excuse after excuse of her own. I say this because, well, that's exactly what happens later, when her opinion of him changes as they have a true heart-to-heart and he backs up all of his talk of helping someone else by, well, simply helping her, and still admitting that, yes, it can also be to make himself feel a bit better too, but he still did it, right? It's this kind of honesty that breaks down that shell, not some free bread, and so hiding behind the ladder did hold him back. Think of it like this. Would Yuzuru have used the excuse, she's my girlfriend, out of nowhere if she didn't think there were ulterior motives outside of the gift, like being attracted to her sister? That can only exist if she believes there are extra layers, and so he could have avoided that by, well, removing those layers to begin with. This is something Shoya starts to realize when he befriends Tomohiro, another loner in his class. His bike was about to be borrowed, and as the only bystander who'd been obviously noticed and called out to, Shoya had to help, offering his own bike in exchange as a passive way to do so. Naturally, the bully isn't just borrowing it and dumps it off somewhere when he's done, leaving Shoya to walk home. But Tomohiro actually goes out to find the bike, and then to actually find Shoya after that, actually managing to and repaying the favor with a lot more disadvantage. After all, he could have just given up his own and cut out some sections here if he was going to go through all that trouble to find a bike either way. But Shoya offers the bread he failed to give Shoko in return, and then the really important part comes the next day when that's not an option. Tomohiro just catches up to him on the way to school and keeps doing so throughout the day and further. With the bike and the bread, there was a reason, however small, some advantage or a debt to repay, something Shoya understood. But once this new friend is just biking faster to catch up, once they're spending time together at the movies and getting food, well, there isn't any of that. That boy is just expending himself for the sake of Shoya directly now, energy used for, well, no physically tangible return. Confused by this, especially when Tomohiro directly calls them friends, Shoya eventually asks,
What does it mean to become someone's friend?
The response is silly in a lovely way, with Tomohiro making up a character and a special handshake on the spot, teaching it to Shoya and then saying,
Now you and I is friends.
And that's really all it is. They spent the most minimal amount of time and energy to learn something new together, the slightest disadvantage to create something which is special between them alone. It makes it clear that there doesn't need to be a reason for friendship, but rather there should almost be a lack of one, not logic which dictates this person can give me this, but simply a feeling that you should bike faster and catch up, or the desire to ask, want to see a movie later, even though they might be busy or you have other stuff you could do too. It should make no sense, at least not in any general way. Because this isn't really a disadvantage, but something that could appear that way to people outside of the situation because it is so specific, relying on an understanding of the individuals and their situations, on things only between them without roles. If you just look at how these people are viewed from the outside, you would just see two loners. It wouldn't make sense that they were together. But if you examine the situation in full, Shoya being pulled into this interaction and having to give up his bike, and then Tomohiro feeling a need to get the bike, and then the bread that he just so happened to have and offering that, and everything that led to, well, then it starts to make sense, but there's very little way to know all that at once, or to communicate it, or even to remember it. Now, if you sat down and created a list across days and while it was happening, you could find all the logic in here, but the point is that essentially it is illogical. So when Shoya next goes to reunite with Shoko, he explains,
"To see you, I felt like I needed a good reason. I found one."
The reason being to be friends and nothing more. Essentially no reason. And she responds, "I'm glad you did. I was thinking the exact same thing. It's funny, isn't it?" Quickly after this, they become good friends despite their past, in well less time than the 2 weeks he missed, making it even more silly that he looked for an excuse. This connection then goes on to form even more, with Shoko taking up his offer to help her out with anything, and her choosing to reconnect with an old friend from their school days he might know, Miyoko, the one kid who did try to befriend Shoko but transferred out soon after. To accomplish this, Shoya is forced to talk to the others from his past, reconnecting with them over this topic, and by the end he's at an amusement park with a whole group of them and new friends, old and new here and there alike, having a realization he deserves friends. Everyone does, because there is no reason for them. These friends add to the conversation, of course, Miyoko especially going back to their childhood. What she did was specifically because Shoko was being bullied, seeking to be one spot of kindness in an otherwise terrible situation. Now this is a noble enough thing, and that's something fine which could lead to a genuine and very strong friendship. Not every method of starting outside of pure friendship is really that bad. However, it does define the start of their interactions by advantage, even if it isn't for the sake of the one doing it. She was trying to pass something on to Shoko, trying to lift her up first and foremost. So when Miyoko just starts to be a target of the bullying as well, taking it from, well, social interaction from nothing to social interaction by losing social interaction, she's going to give up on it because it was always about what could be gained. This is likely a part of why she transfers out. Their bond ended well before advantage could be turned into friendship, and this is the advantage of, well, disadvantage, because it's already defined by loss in a technical sense, so it's stronger against it, can persist through it much better than something about gain. When you already have to try harder for someone, when they have to move away or can't go far or people talk, it doesn't really matter because you have already given something up for them, so what does a new little bit of loss really mean? We see the strength of these bonds and how Shoya's new friend group becomes tested, namely from the actions of Naoka, the childhood bully who pulls things back into that space. From the conflict she causes, literally reintroducing the friends who bullied Shoya for so many years, he starts to fade back into his old ways, pushing people away so that no one drags on each other and he can exist in lonely peace. All that complexity that makes friendship illogical and as such possible, that starts to feel like something in his way, a trouble to deal with, more pain that could be caused down the road as it did before, and so he simply wants to shut it out. He does this by listing the worst things about them to all their faces and refusing to talk further, even to Tomohiro. The complications have started to arise, the moments where the bond is really tested against real disadvantage, and Shoya leans into those to try and kill the relationship and be done with them. But this doesn't happen because that's just an assumption from his old mindset. The remnants of the time the teacher slammed on the board and yelled at him so he figured he could yell too. It's not the truth that he's really facing, because these people can last through such a thing. As Tomohiro responds,
It's alright, you don't mean it, but I'm gonna give you some space.
yes, it is a terrible moment, something you never want to say to a friend, and too many of these could end it. But the point is that they've already gone out of the way for each other, giving up and finding bikes alike, running to catch up or learning to interact again in the overall space, so they can easily manage this tough moment too. These bonds, they're not about what's happening right in this moment exactly, but they're about the entirety of it, summation of everything that's already come and what may in the future. One moment means nothing compared to that. That's friendship for no reason. It isn't about one thing, but the whole thing, the totality of the bond. So they persist, coming together again by the end to affirm their care for each other, a new, great friend group. That's really the thing, bringing it back to roles a bit and completing a thought we've already started. We are definable people at the end of the day, but not so easily. Us in our interactions are much too complex from so many factors across so much time to be accurately listed and detailed into some kind of decipherable logic. There is no way to truly sum someone up into a few words. Every label is just an approximation. And so, if we actually tried to sit down and understand our friendships, the bond between two sets of these complexities, we couldn't. We would spend days, weeks, maybe even months or years trying to do so, and then lose them exactly from that act. To understand them true would, in a way, defeat them. And so we're left with them being illogical, disadvantageous, and coping with that fact, knowing that it really just means that to the outside, they should appear that way. That not every detail could or should be known, that a handshake or a sign no one else knows can mean the world. Friendship is having a reason, but just one so specific and so incomprehensible to our brains, which are so limited, that it just makes more sense and feels more real to say that friendship isn't having a reason. We might think that friendship is a sort of guarantee, the people you can always count on to be around at short notice or in a time of need. And while that can certainly be part of it, certainties here and there, it certainly can't be all of it. We see this in A Place Further Than the Universe, where 4 girls give it their all to reach Antarctica after coming together by chance. Kimari is going into her last and most serious years of school, and so she's desperate to make good on her childhood journal that said she would make the most of her youth, after failing to do so for many years. When Shirase runs by, losing an envelope full of money, Kimari gets her chance in returning it, learning that it's all to reach Antarctica, and latching on to the chance to join her. Now Shirase is trying to reach there because it was the place her mother loved, and was lost in. By going to the same camp, she hopes to find a connection to what was lost, and closure as well. Hinata is the third, Kimari's co-worker, who overhears them talking about the trip, and has an excuse to add herself once Kimari starts working to afford it. Now, she wants adventure before seriousness as well, but more or less as an excuse to escape from her problems at home. And Yuzuki is the only one who actually has a guarantee to go, a mid-level child star who's been contracted to join the civilian expedition and report on it, but doesn't actually want to. She would rather just be able to spend time at home like a normal teen for once, never allowed to in the rush of show business, and with her only friends ever simply trying to catch on to her fame and ditching once this didn't happen. Running into these 3, she agrees to go only if they do as well, so that she can have a normal experience within this kind of crazy one. Now, this almost seems like it should lead to a common goal being the answer, the physical excuse that ties them all together just as it allowed them to meet. But it's exactly that, an excuse. Only one of them, Shirase, actually saw it as their true goal, the point of their actions. For everyone else, it was just the means to another end, to friendship, adventure, escape, which just so happened to overlap with each other. So at least in their case, it's more like friendship isn't having a common goal, but rather having someone whose goal you can abide by in relation to your own. You and this person aren't going to the same place, but you get to take the same route in getting wherever you're going, until eventually those paths diverge once again at a point you probably can't tell. Maybe it's moving away, or a new job, maybe it's even just age, but eventually the paths split. This isn't a very comforting thought, so it makes sense that we'd often see it as having the same goal to avoid this end, or at least the knowledge of it. This is the case for Yuzuki, at least, the one who's had the least time, if any at all, with friendship. With her struggles not just to find friends, but to find genuine ones, and then to keep them once they're around, she's anxious about the topic to say the least. Especially as, during the series, the only friend she's ever made dump her after so many times hearing "I'm busy," simultaneously leaving the group chat that they were all in. This creates an odd situation. What's normally the end of friendship to people, lacking time, new commitments, moving away, are actually barriers to the start of friendship for Yuzuki. This makes her understand it a lot differently, not recognizing the group as friends until they use the actual word for it, and once they do, seeking to secure it against these things immediately. She offers them a friendship contract, a literal written agreement that they'll remain friends even once this trip is over and done. Friendship to her is through and through about guarantees. However, every other girl outright denies the contract without a moment of hesitation, feeling that the comfort and certainty is actually against the purpose of friendship. Shirase contrasts the term to marriage or family, cases where there is quite literally a written agreement that you are bound together. For these things to end, someone usually has to take active steps to break that agreement and have it agreed to by someone with authority. A pretty big hassle, of course. Many may persist for this very reason, barriers to exit. In contrast to this, there is no hassle when friendship ends because, well, it's never really certain when it ends. There often isn't some abrupt or defining moment like signing another contract to break an existing one, or some huge fight and a swearing off of the bond. You just stop seeing each other and then a year later, wonder what to call that person when you tell a story that involves them. Do you still say friend, or like former friend, or have they just downgraded to acquaintance now? The relationship isn't alive, but it's also not officially dead. This is a depressing fact, one that gives Yuzuki little comfort, but there is a hopeful truth to it which makes Shirase state it to begin with. Because that kind of uncertainty is how they came to be friends in the first place, and so that probably needs to be maintained for it to continue, right? The point is expressly that there was no exact common goal, no structure that demanded a membership or some kind of commitment, but that they were able to just show up and vaguely agree by continued action alone to do this thing, and for entirely different reasons even. Imagine if they did have to sign a contract to begin. Hinata probably would have seen the need for a common motivation as crazy and ignored it all, and Yuzuki's mom might have had it looked over by lawyers. Kimari never would have done it because she had doubts like this all of the time.
嫌になったんじゃないよ。やっぱりやめとけよかったって思いたくない。
Change this from showing up to catch a train and check out the ship they'll be on, the fun offer that Shirase made to know she was serious, to a written contract stating that they have to go, and it just never happens to begin with. Just imagine that the next time you went to make a friend, you have to guarantee them that you will see them at least one day a week. Would you keep talking to that person? The essence of friendship can't be something that changes those different paths, that shifts their goals, because those things make up the motivations which brought them together to begin with. There are some important words in what we've covered already though. Continued by action alone. This is the heart of what an uncommitted bond has over a contractual one, that one must try at all times. When there's something to break, there's a barrier to the end which can exhibit a lack of effort, right? I mean, you can see your family only when there's a cultural obligation, like the holidays here in America, dreading it the entire time and yet doing it anyway every single year. You show up, you contribute very little as does everyone, have some pointless conversations about the past year where you haven't seen each other at all, and then leave to do it all over again, even though it's the most stressful part of the year. The persistent nature of the word family overrides the actual on-the-spot choices because family is family, right? These bonds, for me at least, have never created effort but have rather prevented it, because no matter what I do to an extreme degree, good or bad, they will always exist. But friends are not always friends. If you just show up and do nothing, just sitting on your phone or ignoring people or arguing and fighting with no point to it, well, that relationship is going to end pretty quickly and you stop getting invited. Unless everyone is taking action to create positive experiences, the bond will go unmaintained and fall apart at best. The lack of an official label actually makes it more of a choice. No, not one grand one, but rather thousands of small ones made time and time again at each gathering of renewed effort every time. Each issue demands that whenever something comes up, it must be dealt with, resolving the fight or whatever it is before it flares up and burns the whole thing down. The lack of certainty means that there is no way to have a friendship without effort. We see this best with Shirase and Hinata, who conflict more than any of the others. It only makes sense, as they're the most different and strong in their convictions at once. Shirase will say it to your face, and Hinata will let it go forever, and neither will budge on those methods. Before they can actually make it to Antarctica, there's a layover in Singapore, and in getting through customs and all of that chaos, Hinata loses her passport. With the departure impending from a foreign country on a weekend, it's impossible to get the situation fixed, and she resolves to just stay while they go without her. Why should one person's mistake hold them all back? In fact, she gets upset with them for trying to help, even saying that
誰かに気使われるとさ、本心がわからなくなるっていうか。
it makes sense, because that consideration she hates so much is like a form of obligation. It's people making the calculation that you are worth more than their goal, yes, but because of your bond and in spite of what brought you together. It starts to codify it, make it so that there's a certain way you have to act because of your friendship, which then starts to make it not feel like friendship anymore. If they would actually call it all off for her, they could never really be friends again. Not just from all that, but from the shame she might feel from having taken something so important away. From changing their goals, and in a way, changing them, spoiling the friendship. The best thing they can do is go without her, full steam ahead, embracing that there is no guarantee. That is friendship. However, Shirase goes to bed angry at this when Hinata denies her as being considerate, and the next day goes to the airport without her to try and exchange all their tickets for a later flight, even though they're ineligible for that as the cheapest ones. Not taking no for an answer, she offers up the million yen she saved, almost $7,000, to get new last-minute tickets instead. Hinata gets even angrier at this, asking why her friend is being so stubborn and rude to her, which eventually leads to the outburst response,
先に行けって言われて先に行く白状にはなりたくない。
This is a kind of correction. Yes, Hinata is right, and there needing to be the possibility of it not happening for it to mean anything, but wrong in really embracing that fact as what must happen. The point is not to admit we just give up sometimes and do so, but to keep trying even when it feels like there is no point. The possibility of an end alone isn't the value. It's us seeing that, recognizing it, and then trying everything in our power to not let it happen anyway. And the very fact that they're fighting to begin with is an example of that. If there was a guarantee they could just leave Hinata at home and come back to her afterwards, then there would never be a feeling so strong that they would be screaming at each other in an airport, where the deeper reasons behind their actions are forced to come to light. The fight is them feeling a strong need to explain what they feel and then how and why, because they could just leave her, but they wouldn't come back to the same Hinata as the one who would have existed with them on the trip. They'd come back to one who never experienced all they had, who didn't get the same jokes, and who'd only seen pictures of the sights, never smelled what the camp was like after all those years of abandonment, and never heard the penguins in person. They could never transfer all of this to her. They would be different and she would be the same, and so their bond would be weakened because of that. What this is getting at is that her staying home is a bad option, and so is going against her wishes and fighting with her. But the second one holds the possibility of something better after it, and the former doesn't. So you may as well take the negative option, which could lead to something positive, right? The threat of an end is important because it necessitates this kind of action and passion, a reason to perform the maintenance and effort even if it's uncomfortable, because there is always an uncomfortable option in the end. It creates a choice, and then you have to make the better one by your own will. Plus, from this, each one will have a more clear picture of the other. After all, they screamed it at each other, so there's no missing it. Sure, you can summarize what Shirase was doing as being stubborn, as they do at first, but dealing with the issue forced her to explain further.
意地張ってバカにされて嫌な思いしてそれでも意地張ってきた間違ってないから
To call it simply stubborn misses all of that context. That she isn't just choosing to do it for this issue, but, well, that's really just a part of who she is. When she finds something important, she won't give up on it no matter what, and considering how long she's been chasing Antarctica, this is pretty proven. So Hinata can't so easily dismiss it as overly considerate or something just made up on the spot for her, because from the passion it was said with and the words used, it's clearly something much more, a fundamental part of Shirase. Denying that isn't denying a guarantee of friendship, but denying her friend, and seeing it as a proof of value. She's stubborn because she thinks she's right about Hinata coming with them, just like she thought she was right about making it in the first place. That's the level of importance that these friends are on to her. These tough moments that arise from the lack of guarantee reveal the complexities that make this possible, exactly because they're complex and need to be dealt with. They can't be dealt with through rules of thumb and things like that alone. We have to break out all the stops to make it happen, because if we don't, it's gone. So we're going to set aside the easy paths and shortcutted speech and just say what really matters. This influences their later behavior for the better as well, at least in very slight ways. Hinata is dealing with some negative feelings about a message from back home, where former friends who hurt her pretty bad try to just pop back up as being proud of their friend for achieving such a grand thing. However, only Shirase really knows the extent of this, seeing Hinata have a fairly large freak out about it away from everyone else, before returning inside to act like nothing's wrong at all, just like she did with her passport. Now, Shirase tries to push the issue and be considerate, just as she did with the passport, and they mostly have the same conflict as before, just without all the screaming. While this may seem like a lack of growth, it is exactly what should have happened, because they're being themselves, not folding immediately to who the other one is, conforming to roles instead of friendship. It's not really about changing who they are, but just about changing how their behavior overlaps. And this is what happens eventually. Because now that Hinata knows Shirase isn't just trying to be considerate, but is simply being herself, she's able to let down that front of everything is okay and actually initiate a heart-to-heart talk on her own for once, by knowing it won't suddenly alter their friendship into some guarantee she hates. Shirase is much too stubborn for that. And Shirase, knowing Hinata just as well, had to wait for that moment rather than pushing again and again, respecting who her friend is just the same. And because they both do so, Hinata is able to express something that she can't deal with, confronting these almost bullies head on, but that Shirase has done time and time again with how her class viewed her. And so, on the broadcast back home, she does what she's used to and yells at those former friends in Hinata's place, one friend doing what the other never has for them instead. Neither of their selves changed, but the way they interact became better for both, opened new possibilities, and allowed them to help each other in ways they never would have imagined. And all of it stems from the fact that they had to fight each other to fight an end. This doesn't mean that they'll never fight again in the future, or that the friendship will last forever, and it doesn't even strictly make them better people. But for who and where they are right now, it makes them just about as good as they can be. And since it's all about that little part of the path where we overlap, well, we just have to do that again and again at each juncture, and then we'll be the best we could have been. These junctures, the threat of the end, creates a lot of stress, and that can lead to some terrible moments, of course. But the fact we can be sad for something which is lost is both required for it to have been valuable to begin with, and then the proof that it was so once we feel that sadness. It's one of the most important things that I've learned all over and over again. If you're afraid of something, then your body is storing up to deal with what it really finds important. And so do you want all that preparation, energy, and effort to go to waste, to just be built up and let out for nothing over and over again? Or do you want to use it for what you find important and then save those resources for something better? Fear isn't a choice, but what we do with it is. And friendship is doing something with it. We might think that friendship is being a pretty close match with someone else, liking all the same things, having the same time free, and all the like, and that can work very well. But is that really the heart of it? I think friendship might also be defined by being different from each other, and more importantly, being different from other people in the same way as each other. Princess Jellyfish exudes this quality in excess, examining the lives of some shut-in outcasts who go by the Sisterhood, residing in Amamizukan, an apartment building owned within one of their families, which they have deemed as a no boys allowed space. They suddenly have all of that threatened by their block's redevelopment, and have to try and prevent it with the help of a stylish woman, Kuriko, who's actually a stylish man, Kuranosuke, unknown to all but Tsukimi. This group is, well, interesting to say the least, bound together by what feels like very little solid evidence. Their ages differ from pre-20s to mid-30s, with personalities all over the place from unintelligibly meek to excessively loud, hyperfixations ranging from jellyfish to traditional dolls to trains to Three Kingdoms to old men. The Sisterhood are all quite distinct from each other, so what actually makes them all work so well together? a group which hardly ever conflicts despite their numbers and all being in the same location. Well, it's because those differences from each other give them a similarity more important than the rest. The same difference from the world. Yes, being very loud is entirely different from being very quiet. Interest in men who died hundreds of years ago, different from men who will die in 20 or so, but they're both outside of the normal in a similar way. Every single resident here has probably been told the same thing, about growing up, about useless hobbies or being too specific, about being weird and needing to move on. I mean, we see this in how it impacts Tsukimi in the very first episode. Being concerned only with Jellyfish, she goes to see her pet one, Clara, a display tank resident. But when she does, in the tank with it is another species which will kill Clara's client, and she has to act fast against her social anxiety to tell the man closing up the store that he's made a mistake and save her emotional support display tank Jellyfish. If he would listen, that is. She has an appearance that's not flattering to say the least, messy hair and ragged gray sweats, and this code's how he sees her. She's clearly crazy from those look and that speech coming from them, so there's no need to hear her out, and he literally pushes her away. It's only the appearance of Kuranosuke that saves the day, what appears to be a stylish woman passing by and taking on Tsukimi's case for her. The man listens, and Tsukimi goes home with a free jellyfish. She's saying the same thing, well, actually not, because it's less knowledgeable, but she gets listened to because the guy is clearly smitten. But this says something about their interests. Tsukimi is punished for having one which is outside of the norm, and Kuranosuke rewarded for one which is. Fashion gets accepted, while lacking fashion for Jellyfish gets rejected. The message is clear. Some places we can put our time and energy just aren't acceptable. Now, while this is all about being rejected or not, it is also still about friendship, because that's the difference from the world that the sisterhood all share. It could be anything. In this case, it just happens to be rejection. What matters is simply that it's a feeling the individuals have in response to who they are, which can be reached from different means, something like that, carrying the same idea but different methods, not chosen but more happen to them. This nature is what makes the sisterhood work together, even as their expressions are so different. Exactly because they don't have to explain this feeling, which then explains so much of who they are and their situation at large. Sure, they don't know traditional dolls, but they know Jellyfish, and they know enough overlap to not have to ask. As a large part of their life, it's much easier just to be around people who know it and assume it. Just think about the number of times Tsukimi is desperately stammering something to a Kuranosuke who completely brushes off her worries, or gives in, but unwillingly. Each panicked attempt to keep him covered is exactly why the other ones all work so well. This is why our similarities are formed first through our differences. It jumpstarts an understanding of the depth to someone's character in ways similarities sometimes can't, doing the same versus feeling the same. We see this in how, despite being mostly accepted, Kuranosuke, or as they know him, Kuriko, can still rub them the wrong way fairly often. As none of them are really pushing that hard to save their living situation, he tries to step in and be a bit of tough love about it, seeing what possessions they might be able to sell in order to raise funds. And top of that list is Chieko, who has a collection of dolls, with individual ones costing 200,000 yen, or almost $1,400. Walking into the room and immediately saying this,
Creepy. What is this room? Some bizarre doll graveyard?
Of course he's expecting her to sell them. But this already exemplifies what we just discussed, as she has to remind him that there's something important to her after this initial reaction, that is, his inherent feeling was completely negative judgment. Someone with acceptable interests like him just can't know. It goes so far exactly because he's not trying to do something to harm her, he's trying to do something to help her in misunderstanding. In his eyes, this is just a strange hobby that doesn't provide any benefit, and someone to live is a lot better than that, so the best thing he can do is act on that. This is what the similar differences prevent them from having to deal with within the sisterhood. That such a different set of experience with the world can lead someone's best to be more like her worst, their care into what she feels is hate. Lacking the understanding of the feeling behind this act of collection, Kuranosuke only sees the surface and misses the point, and their bond would require a primer on just about everything to avoid these. A lot more effort than someone who just knows. We see this with Banba, someone who cares for the dolls about as much as Kuranosuke. Not at all. She's more interested in trains, a pretty far cry from traditional fashion in miniature form. But as an outlier, she gets what's behind it, able to say,
maybe you don't get it. These dolls might as well be her family.
Because her collection is the same idea, even if it's not full of the same objects. She'll never try to force Chiyoko to sell something important to afford her place to live, because that thing is her reason to have a place to live to begin with. It's also important to note that Banba takes actual action from these feelings as well. You can easily imagine a group of friends where one has something important to them taken away, and the others having different expressions of importance, not knowing that, allow it to happen because it feels like nothing of value to them. This is the opposite, where they actually come together and are able to almost act as one. Someone there to reinforce and prove the importance, speaking in a true and honest way, but for someone else. Because they're not actually just guessing, they can actually know. They can be comfortable doing this, stepping in where they may not truly be involved as an act of empathy. Knowing the similarity behind the difference creates this depth, which then creates this action. And we've been using Kuranosuke to show the importance of that a couple times here, but he also shows the importance of simple differences as well, because the sisterhood do have some outright similar qualities which hold them back, and at times make them the ones doing harm even. They're all quite obsessive people, and much more comfortable within their own interests than around other people, and have been this way for so long, unchallenged by any kind of difference, that it's now become their habit to get their exact way. This happens when Kuranosuke shows up to their weekly hot pot and takes over a bit, putting things together in a way they're not used to. They either run away or even scold him for simple things like putting the noodles too close to the meat, rather than welcoming someone new who, as we'll see, could have really used the company. They had the chance to help here, and instead chose to hurt, with Kuranosuke walking home and feeling like a reject everywhere, a weird crossdresser to his family and the screw-up as Akimi's friends. They failed to understand that a meal can have different importance just like their interests. Maybe for them it's just about the actual food, but for Kuranosuke it's more about the company. You just need to get the meal done and then get to chatting, right? For someone with a stuffy political home, this is a welcome relief that was just taken away. As he explains,
everybody in my family is too busy to bother eating together, so I usually eat alone.
Just as he misses their feelings, they missed his. A whole person turned away because the noodles will get tough. That's the danger of similarities. Some things start to become guarantees that really shouldn't be. But it's also something which harms them as well, not just others. Most notably is their isolationist demeanor, unable to handle crowds, with crowds defined as anyone more than just them. This really acts against them at the redevelopment meeting for their block, where they were meant to advocate for their building, the only place they can live, and ran away instead. The host calls them out for talking during the presentation, they freeze up from all the attention, and then they scatter, deciding that they'll just lose their only home instead of after one failed attempt. From this feedback loop of awkwardness that their similarities cause, they've gotten so uncomfortable with other people that they will lose their place, which makes their lives possible before they'll even accept eyes on them. There's no one here to deal with issues outside of their very narrow collective wheelhouse. No one to actually introduce them to these new possibilities they may need to face in a friendly way, like a friend suggesting a new activity, and so they're only ever finding them in the most serious or hostile ways when it entirely matters right now, thrown into the deep end when a bit of difference could have, well, made all the difference. Having never experienced it, their imaginations run wild, untethered by actual fact or physicality. Of course, this is exactly what Kuranosuke provides, someone who's done it all to replace wild imagination with physical reality. Seeing their failure to stand up for their home because of social anxiety alone, he decided that they all need practice being out in public in a positive context, experiencing new things and seeing how great they can be. By force, he gives them all makeovers and drags them out to a fancy cafe in town with better clothes, their worst nightmare, to be one of the stylish. They expect things to go horribly, this vapid existence with heels that will break their ankles and people that will laugh them out to their names to be shamed, and then nothing goes wrong. After settling them into place by pointing out that, well, there aren't even eyes on them here to begin with, Kuranosuke gets them to order good food, drink good drinks, and see amazing sights. These new experiences will of course calm them down in the future now that he's guided through it, but it's also important to see that they each find some extension of their own interests here. It isn't changing them, but allowing them to expand. Banba gets to see a new train, Maya gets to yell at taller buildings, Gigi gets to stare at old men in real life instead of in pictures. Kuranosuke being different, and as such pulling them into a different space, doesn't actually inhibit their desires in any way, but rather allows them to find new expressions of it, just somewhere they never imagined. The city buildings, or the city trains, or the city old men. The new and old meld into something new, pretty much just allowing them a larger context to be themselves in, and showing them what is and isn't essential. So far, they'd probably all have assumed that they have to be at home to enjoy these things they love, right? Well, now they get to see that that isn't true as they enjoy them all out there. So when they evaluate what's really important about what's really important, they'll have a clearer picture than ever before. They'll know themselves better from knowing the world they fit into better. From this, maybe their worries about needing a specific space will be erased, and they can more easily let go. And yet, at the same time, they also have better tools to make sure that doesn't happen anyway. And that's the thing. These differences haven't changed them, but have opened up new pathways for them to choose to take, allowing their direction to be stronger and better for them than ever before. And an interesting twist is that Kuranosuke finds the same thing in them, with some slight variation. As a rich man's son, you think this would be a lot less possible for him to see something new, given his life has pretty much been pure advantage. He shows up to a party and every guy wants to be his friend, while women have physically fought over him. But the reason for that makes it a limitation of its own. It's his advantage for their advantage. What people really want is to be close to the son of a politician, so those relationships end up vapid, and then that family relationship itself makes it even worse, as this male-dominated household full of specific expectations stifles his true self. Look around for femininity in his life after the departure of his real mother. Is there any? What he knows of it is pretty much parties and 20-somethings on the town, which is only reinforced by everyone he meets wanting to show him a good time like that. So when he needs to express it himself, he goes out and parties, because that's the only space he can really know femininity to be in. To him, a young woman parties, and the only other option is staying at home to keep the house ready for press events for the males in the family. It probably would never occur to him that just sitting around at home could be validating to femininity, and yet here are 4 women doing exactly that, plus Tsukimi, never once questioning if they're girl enough, and never once questioning him either. They do raise issues of relationship and appearance, but the no boy sign makes clear there are no doubts about the base assumption. A girl can be one anywhere. It can be much more than just his first mental image. By literally just existing, Tsukimi and the others show Kuranosuke that he can do the same thing, as he starts to deny nights out and parties to just sit with Tsukimi and watch Clara or make some hot pot or whatever the night in might be. Being around different people showed him a different way for himself to be valid, one which, as he shows them a way with more effort, shows him a way with less effort. Only by seeing different ways can we know how right ours ever was, and you don't get that with overly similar people. And I think this is really one of the most important points, because a lot of people spend a lot of time thinking that others distinct from them in some obvious way will somehow make them less valid, and we've just seen that, well, that's the opposite. We don't gain validity from being the entire picture, but rather from being one detail within it instead. Because if everyone is so similar, the standard is codified in very harsh rules, standards which must be lived up to and there's no other choice. But if everyone is different, if there is no generic picture, well then there simply is no harsh standard to judge people by. Even your weirdest and most hidden parts of yourself will be just as valid because there isn't someone with the almost exact same picture of you, but without those. Having differences takes the pressure off and gives everyone more depth at the same time. And this is kind of just what the world is to begin with. Differences. If everyone looked, sounded, acted exactly the same, who would you even be? If everyone shared the same thoughts, what would your mind even be? Everything would dilute into one mass, and there would be no individuals to even come together to begin with. Connection is only born from the starting point of lacking it and us having to choose it. The first passive step is in being different, and then the first active step is to build a bridge across the gaps those differences make, turning it from just a fact of like, an act of determinism, into a fact of our lives, an act of free will. As we find ourselves in this mess, as our existence finds its essence, we're shaped by our birth, our conditions, and become something distinct from all the other walking possibilities around us. And sometimes we fall into holes we've dug for ourselves from all of that, passions becoming obsessions and cyclically defining us over and over, refined to a point so sharp it could cut anything but would break the second that it did. The only way we break out is by once again embracing that which made it possible to begin with, finding the differences between us and them and then doing our best to overcome them. People who can work against our worst, making us change those expressions for them to understand, our core remaining the same, but the exterior being open to more people and more possibilities. Giving and taking, we form a world of beautiful contradiction, creatures fighting exactly what made them, performing our endless duty to both ourselves and everything to come after us in being so different. In this absurd arrangement, friendship may be the best expression of who and why we are. That's the only thing I can say it truly is. In all the things I've said, it isn't. Friendship is certainly undefinably absurd. And yet, I, and probably everyone, really loves that absurdity.